Hello, everyone, and welcome to HR Innovation and Future of Work Conference organized by Hacking HR. This is a session where we will be talking about the reskilling and upskilling in the global workforce. So we have our experts with us today, and I would like to have a quick roundtable so that they can introduce themselves briefly. So before we kick off the discussions. So let's start with Frances.
Hi, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Frances West. I'm the founder of FrancesWestco. It's a global strategy advisory company working with companies and also governments and startup on how to operationalize inclusion. This is based on my work as IBM's first Chief Accessibility Officer, where we work on technology to enable people who are aging or people with different disabilities can participate in the workforce. And it's great to be on this panel today.
Welcome. And the next one is Val.
Hi, everyone. I'm Valerie Logan from the Data Lodge. So I'm the CEO and founder of the Data Lodge. And what that is a organization that's committed to helping foster data literacy across the world. So we'll be talking, or I'll share a little bit more about that. Data literacy for me is the new literacy of digital society. So I am all in on that topic of how to help everyone, both in work and in life, learn how to speak data. So 25 years in consulting and most recently Gartner, and excited to be on the panel. Thank you.
We're excited to have you too. So next one is Ross. I'm just like having the turns in the order of you appear on my screen. So hi, Ross.
Hi, I'm Ross. I'm the founder and CEO of AQAI. And we're preparing individuals, teams, and organizations for the future by measuring adaptability and helping people improve that. So for the last just over 20 years, I've been an entrepreneur in innovation, marketing, published author, speak at various different conferences, and looking forward to having a nice conversation with some great experts.
Thank you. And last but not least, Cheryl.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cheryl Cran. I'm the founder of NextMapping. We're a consultancy that helps organizations, leaders, and teams be future ready now. The author of 9 books, including the most recent one, NextMapping, Anticipate, Navigate, and Create the Future of Work. And have done tons of research on upskilling, reskilling, why it's necessary, why it's important, and happy to be on the panel with the other experts as well.
Great. So we have all the experts around the table. And I'm Mine. I'm Mine Dedekoca. I'm from Istanbul, Turkey. I'm the chapter lead for Hacking HR in Istanbul. And I have been doing HR and startup events for the last 8 years. I have my own company called Start-IST. And I am connecting people from startups, talents, and investors, anything that they need. I tailor do tailor-made consultancy for the small and medium businesses. So to kick off our discussion, now the terms of reskilling and upskilling, they are so new, and for us they are so now familiar, but for some of the people, they still do not know what those terms are, the terminology, because this is kind of like a terminology for the future of work, I would say. So if I were to ask you, how would you define upskilling and reskilling, and like what are the differences between the two? Anyone want to start, or shall I be just managing that?
Why don't you choose one of us?
Okay, Cheryl, I'm choosing you.
Yeah, I had a feeling. And you know, it's hard because everybody would jump in otherwise, I think, right? We're speakers and we're all ready to talk. So from my perspective, upskilling is you already are highly skilled upskilling is you're going up in your skilling. So Val talked about data literacy. That would be an example of upskilling your data intelligence and being able to upskill. Maybe your current skill level is in managing and in leading or in marketing, but upskilling would be adding skill that you don't currently have. So data literacy, AI literacy that, Ross, which you'll be talking about. So, and then reskilling is you've been in a certain career or trajectory for a period of time, and now you're wanting to reskill beyond what you've already learned. And they can be overlapping, in my opinion, because it could be upskilling and reskilling at the same time. So I don't think we should get caught in the terminology of what it is. Quite frankly, what it means is we all need to be lifelong learners, and we need to be learning some really critical skills here in order to be future relevant.
Yeah, so like data literacy would be for someone, it would be an upskilling and also reskilling.
Correct.
If they are so new to the idea. Yeah. So
if I could add just a real quick bit, because I'm quite a visual person, and I think of upskilling as a vertical line. And this is generally related to the same job, but you're learning new things to enable progression within that job, skills required for it. And then if we think of reskilling as a horizontal, so you're moving to a different career or different area of work. So I think that might be an easy frame of reference for people to think in up and down and left and right, vertical and horizontal.
Yeah, it's always, I really love visualizing these terminologies. So it's like more, it stays more, I think, on our minds. So, but why now? So why are we talking about these terminologies, the terms at this moment, like for the last 2 or 3 years? Why now? What has happened so that we are talking about these things, and the companies are spending time and money on these things, the activities, and just like having their talent to upskill and reskill themselves. So Val?
It's a really good question, and specifically for the area of data analytics and AI, I think there's a series of different both accelerations as well as, I would say, maybe some convergences. And so what I mean by that is the accelerations are, for a while, data and analytics was left to the experts, and it was something that was very specialized in certain use cases and certain domains in certain industries. But now we're seeing so much more familiarity with how data is manifesting and accelerating even our lives. So I think it's just becoming more accessible. And also the executives that have been really trying to fix a lot of the data challenges, they're making strong headway in data quality and making analytics more accessible to the masses in the organization. So I think there's been a certain amount of foundation work that has had to take place for the masses to be ready for a broader degree of adoption. I think the other piece is this convergence with how we're living our lives, right? So I've heard at this conference quite a bit how, we bring our personal experiences as expectations into our work. And so I think there's also that where we're using data to live our lives and make decisions, and there's a need and an expectation to have that kind of access in the workforce. So those are some of the top thoughts that I have.
And also, like, apart from data, so Frances, and I would like to refer to your experience going to other countries as well. Like, it's really now important because as we go global and the companies go global, the talent going global, now we don't have any borders. Like, any company can just hire anyone around the world working remotely. Now everything is much easier. So everyone can just like apply for a job on the other side of the world, or a company could hire someone like living in a village, only having an internet connection. So what does it take for like the managers, the leaders, the people to be able to manage those people coming from all around the world, having different backgrounds, having diversity?
Yeah, so going back to some of the question you were posing, I think one of the things, just like you mentioned, the world is actually getting smaller and brought closer in many cases due to technology, right? So we now see that, especially, I would say the last decade, for example, the outsourcing kind of phenomenon that was driven by a very disruptive kind of both a business model thinking and also technology enable that we can parcel out the pieces of work into different parts of the world. So as such, I think both company and the individual are facing this increasing accelerated fear of being irrelevant from the skill set standpoint. So I think that's why on both at the individual basis and also at the company basis, everybody is scrambling, trying to figure out how do I stay relevant and because the job that used to be done, for example, in the United States can be quote unquote chopped up, and be sent over to Vietnam, to China, or to India. So overall, I think there is a stronger and more immediate sense that I have to make sure my skills is right there and be relevant. But this also poses a very interesting challenge for HR professionals, which is what we are talking to today. Is that how do you manage the diversity? And like you mentioned, and I think with the technology coming in as underpinning, a lot of jobs will be automated. And that actually gives the what I call the HR, the human first thinking really back into the practice of HR. It's almost like a interesting time because for a while, I think human resources have moved away into more of a process-based kind of concentration. But because of the automation, because the globalization, we actually need HR more than ever to bring the human factor back into play and how to manage a human and the machine or technology interaction.
So Ross and Cheryl, you are working with companies and you have tools so that these companies become like you are actually assessing the readiness for both the individuals and the companies and like the leaders. Cheryl, you have like different programs for leaders, for startups, for companies, for individuals. So I would like to ask you, like when you look at the leaders, I mean, how are you assessing this readiness? How are you just like giving them like a plan or like a process how they can just like reskill themselves or like upskill themselves? What is that process? What does it take for those leaders to just like get into that process?
Yeah, I think like further to Frances's comments about the reason why this is happening, why there's such an urgency or an urgent feeling and this thing around is, are we afraid of the future or are we actually preparing for the future? And I think upskilling and reskilling is preparing for the future. And there's two responsibilities, and I'll talk about, the assessment piece, but one is for the leadership of organizations to assess where they are right now with their talent. What is the skill level? What's the baseline? Where do they need to grow to? And that's where, fundamental leadership needs to be involved in, and for the HR professionals listening there, I know we're preaching to the converted here, but they need to be involved really strategically with where's the skills gap? Where do we need people to be? Is it increased data literacy? Is it increased uptake of robotics and automation buy-in? Is it upskilling the soft skills, which I hate the term, I prefer essential human skills. But is it additional, what are the skills needed to get us to continue to be relevant as a business? So from a NextMapping process, we look at where are they now? Where are the skills gaps? How do we fill those skills gaps? And what are the delivery mechanisms for filling those skills gaps? So it's no longer just traditional training. It's online learning coupled with experiential learning, coupled with VR learning, coupled with gamification, coupled with coaching. So there's a very multifaceted way to deliver this upskilling and reskilling that we're talking about. And I feel like a lot of organizations right now are they're sort of in that transition zone of change where they know it needs to happen, but they're not necessarily, maybe they don't have the buy-in from everyone to get things moving to where they need to go to be future ready, but also setting up those systems to say, okay, how do we start with this group here to get them up and ready and then build that mentorship guidance throughout the system to help aid with this upskilling and reskilling goal that many organizations are looking at and know that they need to do.
Okay, I will come back to that and how you are just like managing it within the company. Like, how do you choose your champions? How does it just like spread in the company. But going back now to the question, Ross, so how, as AQAI, how are you dealing with this, and what is your experience about like assessing these gaps?
Thank you. I think the reality is of assessing any skill gap and then trying to look at predicting the value of a future skill is so complex now, because we've got these layered capabilities that are meaning the landscape changes every move you make. So where we might think this is a skill I need and it'll have this kind of value for this period, therefore I will educate and put some resources in to bring that to bear. If by the time you've then acquired that skill, it's then become irrelevant, this is the reality we might be facing. So I think the challenge is more about certain life skills that will allow us to deal with uncertainty. So whatever new information and things that are happening because of all of these convergences of layered capabilities and technologies, we need to go, I think, deeper in terms of the human trait to be comfortable in a state of uncertainty, rather than, I learned this new skill, now I'm going to be valuable. Oh dear, 2 years has gone, that's now no longer valuable. So for us, when we're looking at this, and it's why we focus specifically on adaptability, and we have a model for this called ACE, which is A is the ability part, C is character, and E is environment. And each of these factors either inhibit or accelerate someone's ability to take on that new information, behave differently to those new circumstances. And we think that's critical in the reality of exponential times we're living in. So the way that they show up and the way that we assess these is curating other pieces. You know, grit is part of it, resilience, ability to unlearn. You know, that's a key component of reskilling and upskilling, is what do I stop doing? You know, an old process that served me yesterday, is that no longer serving me tomorrow?
And you know, I think this is much harder, but I mean, than learning something new, because there's a friction between what you have been doing for so long, and because I mean they are telling you to forget everything that you have done so long.
So very quickly, I mean, we're living in a high stakes game at an organizational level. Getting this wrong and you collapse. You know, last night we had another airline in the UK, Flybe, go into administration. Thousands of jobs lost. You know, that's a failure of adapting to what is required and to show up in order to create value. And I think the challenge of unlearning things that are just okay or doing good enough are the dangerous ones. The ones that really hurt us, give us a burning platform, we can change those easier. But these sort of under the skin, that process has been all right, it's not too bad, that will suddenly catch us by surprise, and it will go from very gradual to sudden, and then that will be the death. So it's much, I think the hard part is to unlearn processes that are delivering a okay result. And that's very hard when you look at changing workforces, mindsets, processes, the way that things have been done. It's that immune system of it's always this way, and it's giving us result. If it's not giving result, we've seen organizations change easier. But the harder one is when it's giving an okay result now, but the landscape changes and tomorrow it will not.
By the way, Mike has just shared a very good example on learning. I recently changed my Mac password. Every time I still put my old one in, unlearning is hard. That's because, I mean, it becomes so natural, the things that, like driving a car, like once you are an expert in driving a car, you don't even remember how you get to the point where you were driving to. But when you are like learning it for the first time, you're so careful about everything, you're just like cautious about everything. But once you have that skill, then it goes so naturally, and it's really hard to unlearn it. So
I mean, I want to jump in and make a quick comment, and it's interesting. It's my observation, but I would love to hear from the other panelists. What I have seen is that on the skill set, historically, especially for big corporations, you know, like IBM, a lot of times it seems to be the corporation's responsibility to say, okay, we're transforming. For example, IBM went from hardware to software to services. So every time we make that shift, we will say we're going to put together a learning, on how to sell. Today is like quantum computing, right? But what I've seen is that maybe it's because the disruption in the marketplace and like what we talked about before in technology and so on, individual actually is beginning to own up that I need to be actually upskilling, reskilling, independent of the company, right? So I think I don't think that this has happened before. So there is actually a more active participation or willingness to participate from the employee side. So from that standpoint, I do think that we're actually entering into a golden age especially for HR, of this, how do we harness the kind of necessity from the institution side, right, to survive or to be competitive, but then also the desire on the individual side, so that we can blend these two and to create the best outcome. I think this is upskilling and reskilling. As I was thinking about it, it really is becoming more than just a kind of a HR or company kind of phenomenon.
I also think that this is like becoming something that they attract talent, because now they're also struggling to attract talent. The new generation, because they're all interested about just joining startups or even founding their own startups. So I also think that this is something that they are like investing there, and the reason why they're investing time and money is because to attract that talent who is like otherwise would go to the other like smaller, or I would say like startup mindset companies.
Yeah, I would add to this that I think, there's to Frances's point, there's big corporation and responsibility for upskilling and reskilling, especially with the rise of robotics and automation. So for example, Amazon is just investing, $500 million in upskilling and reskilling their workforce. And we have a whole percentage of people that are going to freelancing, who are going to contracting work. That faction, and then there's a lot of organizations, multinationals, who say we want our people to be more entrepreneurial, which is where personal accountability for upskilling and reskilling comes to play. But I think what we're seeing is, to your point, Miney, is that the startups and the young millennials are saying, yeah, I'm going to upskill and reskill because I'm wanting to keep myself relevant for the future. Within the organization, I think that the leaders need to create an environment where you can be upskilled or reskilled within the organization, but you also have the personal accountability to direct your own career based on how you're upskilling and reskilling. And I think that's an opportunity within HR, is providing that inspirational development mindset around, we'll work with you collaboratively within the organization and individually to upskill and reskill. I think that's a valid point, Frances, that you bring up around that personal accountability piece, because we are definitely gone from the days where the organization took care of everything for everybody. Those days are gone. Yeah.
And just to bring this back to the point about assessments, I love exactly how this has been responded to by my panelists here, that there are actually 3 types of assessments that align with the 3 points you've made. So there's the classic, and I'm talking obviously about data literacy, but there's the classic like organizational data literacy maturity assessment. So where is the company in embracing the topic of data literacy as a workforce competency? That's like one big level of assessments. I do those with companies. Then there's the grassroots movement, which is 10 quick questions, but that anyone in the organization can take to look at their like data literacy style, like and willingness and interest. 10 quick questions associated with some easy learning paths, ignite that grassroots. Then there's more of the standard professional development competency assessment, which is, okay, how are we really going to look at someone's skills and development, which is a more formalized assessment. So even assessments, I think, Mine, align with kind of this both top down and bottom up. Mm-hmm. Does it make sense? Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, as we were talking with you during our prep call, like because now we are also talking about the new generation, but we have the old generation. So, and as we call them, like the
let's not call them old. Let's call them seasoned.
Exactly, more experience, I would say. Well, I will be categorizing them as the future workbooks are categorizing them. We are all digital immigrants. Now, even on this panel, we are all digital immigrants. And the companies are still dominated by the digital immigrants because the digital natives are still young to dominate the workforce. But it's going to go there. And I think, I mean, now we started talking about adult learning. Now, because we have data readily available, and it's much easier to get these new skills. And how do you see those digital immigrants being open to reskilling or like learning something new or unlearning, as Ross would put it? Yes,
If I can
Ross.
give a bit of a view on this, digital is just a channel. You have a character that you might be a lifelong learner. You have curiosity. It just happened to be your channels of the past were meetings, conversation, the library where you'd go, you'd read books. Now it's become more accessible. So it gives lighter fuel to those that have already been curious and lifelong students. And this is not, in our view, a necessarily generational piece. Yes, there are certain stereotypes and fears. More of it has come out from our research in work tenure rather than age, shall we say, and linked to a motivation style of what will drive them to learn or to upskill.
Mm-hmm.
Is this that I'm motivated because it's security? I'm feeling under pressure, I'm stressed, and I risk and fear my future? Or am I doing it like Frances was putting of a generation looking to win, and they're proactive characters, and they're taking their own responsibility. So I think it's a balance that for us, we want to make sure no one's left behind. So however someone shows up, how do we make sure we are upskilling and reskilling the entire global workforce? So the responsibility of an organization from our perspective is to provide the environment in which that can flourish. So that is personalized for one who is motivated by security to do that and give the environment that reduces emotional stress and overwhelm to give them space to be able to do it. And likewise, to excite and inspire those that are proactive to, gain promotion and gain new roles. For some, that's exciting. For others, that's not what they want to hear or do. So I think it's important for a company to provide the health and the support and environment to allow those things to happen. That's critical. And from an individual's perspective, we do need to recognize those that are going to find this hard. There are going to be people that are going to lose their identity, sense of purpose. You go to a dinner, you go to a meeting, new people. First few conversation questions are, oh, so what do you do? And we're so linked to the identity of the role we currently have. When we no longer have that role, by either choice or not, there's going to need to be support. I like to give just very quickly one example of the computer. That was a role. That was a job title. So you would advertise and see roles for a computer. It was a mathematician's role. Now we've lost the association to that being an actual work task, and it's a physical thing. How many other roles that are currently known as a role will be a piece of software as a service, AI as a service, all of these things in the future? And those people that used to have that as an identity, how are we going to help them transition through their life outside and inside of work? So I think upskilling and reskilling is not just a work-centric piece. This is about humans navigating life and dealing with all of that change.
I would add to that. I think that's very well clarified and said, Ross. I think that change leadership is a psychological process. And so you can't put it into the context of broad generalizations around groups of demographics, right? So that I agree exactly with what Ross is saying. And I think what's required is a change leadership approach within organizations versus the standard change management, which is this process-oriented approach that is not about people at all. It's all about systems and data and process, in my experience. I'm being very frank here. So the change leadership process is creating those change champions within the organization that help with the psychological process on a one-to-one, human-to-human basis. So sitting across from somebody going, Jane, what are you struggling with right now? Well, I'm struggling with the fact that they're giving me brand new technology to learn and they've given me no way to learn it in a way that feels comfortable for me. Okay, Jane, let's break this down. Step one, what do you need to feel comfortable to get started? Like, we're talking one-on-one change leadership conversations, leader to team member, peer mentoring, reverse mentoring. It's not going to happen just through saying this change is happening, you need to upskill, you need to reskill. It's a very psychological process that we need to honor. And I think in the past, it's been about making change for the sake of profits. Now it's about change for the purpose of people, both the customer experience and the employee experience. I think that's really at the core of everything we're talking about here, right?
Yeah, this is, I think, so important. The peer support, I think, is really very important, because people need to be supported, as you say, because this is a change, and change needs a support. So, Frances, you were trying to ask something?
Yeah, I want to make a point, actually, going back to what Ross mentioned earlier about motivation, right? I think for skills, whether you are young, or older, I think I'm the oldest person here, so I can speak to that. I do think that as we move, the society move, quote unquote, to more mature phase where the technology, is going to create a lot of automation. In many cases, will take away, certain kind of repetitive tasks. Both company and individual really has to look beyond what the kind of just the paycheck in front of them, and then look at a common or higher perspective. In this case, I think one uniting potential of point of view is the purpose, right? What is the purpose of work, and what is the purpose of doing things? And I can tell you that for somebody like myself, who's actually starting my second career, I'm driven by a purpose that I want to be able to use my my knowledge to help the next generation, to make the world better, right? So this kind of a purpose-driven mentality, I think, more than ever needs to be promoted inside organization. I mean, we know earlier this year or last year, 180 plus companies rallied around the business roundtable, and led by JP Morgan Chase, the chairman, Jamie Dimon, talked about the responsibility of organizations, not just to shareholder anymore, right? That they have a purpose. They have to be purpose driven. I think, again, that gives us a real kind of a connection point or unifying point to drive, or to motivate employees and individuals to upskill their, because when you have skills, you want to use the skill to do something. And I think the more we can start blending these, I guess, a Maslow hierarchy of needs, then potentially we can really create a psychological environment, like Cheryl mentioned, to be self-driven, to do change for better skills.
Could I just add maybe one more layer to this discussion? Your original question was about this concept of a digital immigrant, and how does that relate to upskilling?
I was going to ask you to add that point.
Yeah, so,
I love that analogy.
So there is, to me, there's an undercurrent to the discussions that we're having, as well as I've been seeing in the conference, which is how do we affect change? But to me, change and culture, one of the major elements of how a culture operates is language. And so I was sharing with Mine in preparation for today a story about in the data literacy world, or in the data world, at any given day, I can be interacting with 30-year veterans of business intelligence and data warehousing, or I could be interacting with a brand new PhD data scientist out of university. So you have many different dimensions of background there. But what I'm trying to facilitate is what is their shared language? Because to Cheryl's point around connection in a one-on-one setting or communication, it's based in language. So the story I was sharing is, and for data literacy, I've created this thing called information as a second language. So ISL, this idea that we can teach this language of digital society very much like English as a second language was taught. And so the story I was sharing was back in 1914, Ford Motor Company. Think about what was going on in 1914. Ford Motor there was an acceleration of demand for the vehicles. It was an immigrant population that was staffing the Ford Motor plants. In 1914, Ford Motor actually created the Ford English School. Now, they didn't do that because they were trying to be nice. They did that because there were safety concerns in the plant, and there were issues of efficiency in the plant because the population of workers came from different languages. So they created one of the earliest ESL implementations of the Ford English School. So the reason I share that story is I think history is repeating itself, and that in a digital society, we're ignoring this need for a shared language. And I think we need to make it explicit. I would love to hear the panelists' thoughts on this idea of making language, give it a brand, and actually make it explicit. What do you guys think?
Well, I think to stay on track with what, I'll let you sort of direct that rather than take this down a whole other rabbit hole, but I have lots to add to that, Val, but yeah.
Well, okay, you can, if you want, you can just, we have some more time, so if you would like to add from your experience, then I will ask also Frances to talk about some skills that would be needed for the diverse teams as well. So Cheryl, go ahead if you want to share some.
I love what Val's saying, because shared language could be data, for example, right? Mm-hmm. Shared language could be purpose, as Frances said. So it's really about connecting the dots and providing that collated focus where people can communicate, congregate, and collaborate very, very efficiently. Technology is allowing us to do that. Slack, intranets. We're doing a virtual meeting here, and at the same time, what do we have in common? I think is the very important question to ask ourselves when we're looking at upskilling, reskilling, or anything we're talking about. The future of work is about how we can only collaborate when we find common meaning. Mm-hmm. When Frances said purpose, I feel like organizations have been talking about purpose for decades. But now it's linking purpose to the individual, not a corporate entity saying, we're on purpose. Right. It's like, no, every individual is connected to their individual purpose while connecting with the meaning and purpose and the context of the overall. And that can only be done through shared language. So Val, I think that was a good story and a good encapsulation of that. So that's all I wanted to add to that, was that you can't have meaning and purpose without shared language. Yeah. True.
Well, I actually last year wrote a book about authentic inclusion drives disruptive innovation, and in that I really believe that even though I'm a technologist, working IBM research and this and that, I really believe that we're coming to an age where the human first is so important, and that fundamentally we have to align purpose with principle, and then the profit will come, right? So going back to Cheryl's point, this principle, it's almost equate to what Valerie is talking about as a common language. What is the principle of organization, whether you're a government, you're a private enterprise, or even a startup, right? How do you, as the leader, especially the top of the business or the top of the institution, how do you articulate what is the purpose of your organization, your institution? If you can clearly articulate that, then your employee, your customers, your partner can understand and then can rally around you. And then I think individually they will apply their own creativity to get the right skills if they believe that purpose is authentic, is real. So I think it's very interesting. I think we come a long way from the kind of second, what they call the second industrial revolution, where we're just widgets making things, to now a human-first society where we actually individually have thoughts and ideas, even though if you read the article, you think that AI is taking over. But I think more than ever, because AI is coming at us, the human, in my book, I have a quote, as technology becomes more human, human needs to get more human. So I actually, again, coming back to the reason why we're on this panel, the HR profession more than ever is so important in being the kind of central orchestrator, of all these different functions.
I would also
to really
want to
deliver the
reference
purpose.
to your experience with like working. You were talking about, as we were having the prep call, you were telling me about like the blind developers, the coders, and the deaf people in the PhD program. So it's not only data literacy or anything about technology that we should be considering as we are talking about reskilling and upskilling, but as the companies become more diverse and as the inclusion is something that they are paying more attention to, there are some skills that the employees, the managers need to adopt so that they can manage in those diverse environments. So can you just like share briefly about that experience that you have you had with those people?
Sure. I actually so like in the introduction I talked about my work was in the digital inclusion or accessibility area. I actually kind of fell into that world by accident with just a career move. I thought I would just do it for 3 years and then move on. I'm a career IBMer, spent 30 plus years. But the last job, which is as being the chief accessibility officer, has been life-changing, because what I realized, because on my technology team, we actually have a blind scientist, we have deaf, engineers. And what I realized that precisely because the world is getting so competitive, that every organization really need that out-of-the-box innovation. And when you have people who have what I call extreme challenges, right? If you kind of lose your sight or lose your hearing and whatever, or whatever physical challenges, but that in turn can make you extremely creative. And that as an organization, if we really tap into that. I mean, we talked about this is actually the comment is the theme applies to any underrepresented segment, right? Whether it's women or sexual orientation, but there is a common theme that the human ability is amazing, and that as an organization going forward, we need to really create an environment so everybody can make a difference, not in spite of, but because of their difference. And that sounds like a kind of easy slogan, but it actually takes the entire organization, a holistic approach to operationalize inclusion. I mean, which is key things, because inclusion, frankly, up to this point has been more of a initiative, or especially in many cases are driven out of HR. But we need more than ever, like at least in my work, and which is what I, kind of begin to talk about through my book, through my speaking, is that actually the CIO needs to talk about this, CTO, the CMOs, all the C-suites. It's not just about HR. Actually, it's beyond HR. HR has done their party, I mean, their work of bringing it to the table, but we need the rest of the organization to really not just talk about it, but do something about it.
Does anyone have anything to add to it?
I'd like to add just a couple of thoughts on this, because I find it really interesting around, we're talking about reskilling and upskilling a global workforce, and I want to bring us back to the fact of just how big this challenge is and what the stakes are, and how if we reimagine the thought of technology at war with us as people and us at war with it, i.e. we need this literacy and we need to understand it, and then will it take over us, or will we always make sure we're the alpha? To think about how do we augment and leverage this to solve exactly some of these challenges. So I love Cheryl's view of one-to-one interactions that's personalized, because that can respond differently to the data input. The challenge of a lot of technology at the moment is it will follow a given pathway, i.e. a learning piece of content will be created as a static asset. It went from, a written story to a book to now digital content, e-learning, but often it's still a very static piece from a place of knowledge of an expert that is then seen by many. So it's a distribution shift through digital. What I'm seeing is a shift where we're able to create digital twins of curated knowledge. So close to human type of interaction of reskilling and upskilling people. So if you look at companies like Soul Machines, for example, that are creating digital brains that you can feed it with a curriculum that then can do something that's very hard for a knowledge expert to do. Each of us can only have a one-to-one conversation in a certain way. We're having a one-to-many here, but we can't listen to the challenges that each person is doing despite their best efforts in a chat environment. If we can scale truly individualized conversations on a one-to-one basis through technology, that I think is a great step forward to be able to reskill a global workforce that remains relevant every time the pieces change. So I think this hybrid blend is important, and to use it in a way in which it solves these massive challenges we've got, and it's going to come in unexpected ways. And the last thing I just want to pose is it reminds me of the 3 Horizon framework in innovation. And Horizon 1, where we're trying to do new things, is taken from data, and it's about productivity and efficiency. And most companies have been built around that in the 20th century. That's where value came from. Next Horizon, where it was, just taking what we did with a slight tweak and to keep it swift for time. Horizon 3, it's brand new. It requires imagination, and it's not, it looks completely crazy and insane to everybody working on productivity and efficiency and then small gains. That's the world we're playing in now, is where we need this imagination to completely break free, to rethink how we're going to reskill and upskill. And it's the balance of, yes, some things will be valuable to us, others won't. And so I just wanted to add that little bit of thought.
No, great. Do you have anything to add? Otherwise, I'll be asking Cheryl. You were talking about peer mentoring and as well reverse mentoring. So how do you feel that reverse mentoring is going to help, like, as the support function of this change? Where does it lie into, and like where do you see it going, and how important you feel that it is in this big picture?
Well, reverse mentoring is not new. It's been happening for the last decade. So it's not like it's a new concept, and probably many of the professionals listening are familiar with reverse mentoring. Companies like Microsoft have had tremendous success with it as far as their reskilling and upskilling initiative. Really what it is taking people that have skill that others don't have and mentoring it to them. And that might look like having a young technologist mentoring up to an executive level seasoned worker. But it can look in very diverse and different within every different organization. But the reason it's so important is, and it goes back to Ross's point, I'm really intrigued, Ross, about the whole scaling of that one-to-one. I think you're onto something for the mass speed of acceleration of what we're talking. I think there's brilliance there. And so that's where reverse mentoring is. How do we scale reverse mentoring, right? I think is the question to ask. And so right now, at its simplest, reverse mentoring is person to person. But then how do we scale that? Just a quick example of upskilling and reskilling is one of the biggest challenges our clients have is knowledge transfer. Many organizations have seasoned workers who have lots of knowledge, years of experience stored in their hard drive that organizations are wanting. How do we get this and keep it, and yes, workers are working longer and working until they're going to be 75 and 80. So that's going to partly solve the talent retention and attraction challenge. However, there's still that knowledge transfer of people that are retiring, that are leaving. And AI is solving that in big ways in that we're finding some organizations, we've actually gone in and videotaped. We've had people be videotaped because nobody wants to sit down and tell you what they know for 30 years. But if you videotape them and say, hey, how do you do your job? What's your philosophy? Where do you find out your resources? And then dump that into an AI-enabled product that then parses out that information into searchable database, that's going to solve a lot of this knowledge transfer. And when you say that to a group of people, they're like, oh, that's too scary. That's like, that means you're telling us that people aren't important. No, what we're saying is that knowledge transfer is freaking gold for the future of organizations. So unless we can access it, and I think that's where, you know, Ross, because you got me excited when you scaled that. I was like, oh yeah, that's what we're doing with, you know, knowledge transfer is exactly what you said about that peer-to-peer and that one-to-one. So
one real quick another piece. So to shift our thinking from one-to-one on a human now into I'm going to do my learning today. I do my learning between 9:30 and 10, and I go to a course, or now I go to this, you know, virtual human that's as good, to thinking about this when we enter the world, which is right, you know, very, very close, of an augmented reality and virtual reality that can allow me to take the learning moments in microdose when I need it, when it's convenient, and maybe when I didn't even expect it. That's the opportunity to learn. And, you know, we know how to do this with children and babies, you know, and pets when they're young, and puppies and various bits. And we often forget the simple stuff. And the reality of the future we're facing, of where technology can allow every moment of our lives to be learning without us even feeling it, without us feeling like we're reskilling and upskilling, it just becomes the new normal. So that it's interactive, it observes what I'm doing, and it can give me that, you know, it's the 1 minute manager, right? It's catch me in the moment of those things.
We can have another hour added here because because what you're talking about is Ken Wilber's transpersonal. So we're actually talking about heading into the teal level of society here, is what we're talking about here. So this is like upskilling, reskilling is an existential. It really is
not only about the workforce. I mean, it's
a concept we're even touching on here. Yeah.
I just want to, it's very interesting that Cheryl, and also Ross, you were talking about how individual conversation, you know, can scale. If you think about this forum we have here, the Hacking HR, like this hour, you know, of 5 of us speaking, and to me, if we use captioning, for example, by the way, that is one of the first technology available for accessibility for people who are deaf. Just imagine if we can caption our conversation individually, right? And then somebody who couldn't make this panel can use data analytics or keyword search, because now you transformed your voice to text. Just think about that power of being able to grab or zoom in to the piece. For example, Ross, when you were talking about this whole idea of the individual, or to Cheryl, you know, your reverse mentoring. So all these things that we're talking about actually is made doable today. So if HR professionals working with the CTO, the CIOs, I think we can put in place some very, very awesome and immediate operationalized, you know, kind of initiative without really, you know, spending a lot of money, because captioning used to be expensive, but now with Google, you know, your YouTube, you feed it in, you know, it's actually pretty good. So it's very exciting time I think for all of us. I, for one, love this kind of 1 hour thing, because I get the, you know, the quick bits, you know, of all the best information. I guess it's a plug for hacking HR.
I think that's the thing in this new era. Now we can just like scale everything with this new technology, and so like it's really easier now. Before we wrap up, I would like to ask the audience if they have any questions to ask any of our panelists. So this is the time for a short Q&A. If you have any specific questions. I think, as we're not receiving. So, well, you are doing boot camps for data literacy. Okay, we have one question, but before that, so during those boot camps, what is your observation about like the people coming from different departments or like from different backgrounds? Do you see any difference in terms of the acceptance or like the adaptability of those people?
Yeah, so the boot camps, just to clarify, are it's fascinating. So I'm running virtual boot camps over 10 weeks in this kind of a setting, and I'm bringing together one person from each company. So it's a cross-company collaboration. So it's not me training like 50 people in one company. Instead, I'm providing a virtual setting for cross-company collaboration of data literacy program leads. So think of this. So think of a company says, hey, I want to go after putting a data literacy initiative. I want to kickstart it. So I'm bringing literally an opportunity for people from different companies to come together, and I'm being the trainer model. In doing that, I did not know what kind of people would be put forth for the boot camp. I thought they would be data and analytics geeks like me, but it turned out that in my very first boot camp, I had a learning and development professional from one company. I had a change management chief of staff type person in another. And then I had a good classic data and analytics professional. And every single one of them excelled in the boot camp. So what I'm finding is that I think is a microcosm of what we're talking about. It really is not about, oh, this cookie cutter background. It's about who has the passion, who sees the possibility, who leads with purpose, to Frances's point. And it was really about who were the people that were so passionate and adaptable, right? Clearly, these are people who could make pivots and shifts, and they could translate to the organization. So I hope that's just interesting data point. Yeah. And these were from both Fortune 100 companies and a London bank and a global pharmaceutical company. But it started with those people and the leaders who see the vision, and they are starting. And I said to someone today, if you haven't started, you're already behind. So you better start.
I think this is great to hear, because it's not about what background you have or like what role you're in. So it's not only the digital people or like the tech people that needs to just like have these new skills, but it's like everyone. So we have two questions. What are some of the tools you see organizations using to upskill and reskill? This is one.
Well, I can mention one. One of them, I mentioned gamification as a form of micro-learning, to Ross's point, and giving that real-time learning in the moment. And a company called Axonify, which is a Toronto-based organization, does a really good job of micro-learning and gamification. And I see gamification as being an increased form and modality of upskilling and reskilling. So that's one that I'll mention.
Cheryl, can you write it? Okay. Amy just did it.
There it is. Yeah, AXONIFY. Yeah, axonify.com. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other tools?
The other one that I would mention is on the data literacy front, that feels very abstract and very scary to people, and legitimate fear of like, oh, that's math or that's data. And one of the powerful things that's happening is with a lot of the self-service business intelligence tools like Click or Tableau or Microsoft BI, they are embedding the learning, and to Ross's point earlier about augmenting the learning experience. So for example, when someone is looking at a dashboard and they hover over the term that they're looking at in the display, it will give them the lineage, the source, the assumptions, and even just the basic, so they don't have to leave that environment and go to some data dictionary. Instead, they're saying, no, let's embed this. And another good example is preventing people from themselves, meaning you're not supposed to put time series data in a pie chart, right? Time series data is, by time, you're supposed to follow it on a line. They won't let you map that in a pie chart because it's not supposed to be in a pie chart. So it's like, guided learning, but also just embedding and augmenting the experience, and prescribing the next step. Those are some great examples.
And by the way, Ross being one of our sponsors of this global conference, can you also talk a little bit about what AQAI does and how the attendees can get this benefit that you are offering specifically for the attendees of this conference?
So very quickly, and I think it's been a theme consistent throughout every conversation, is how important adaptability is. And it is improvable, But in order to improve anything, we have to measure it and understand it better before we can then improve, so that we know any interventions are actually having an impact. So what we've done is we've built the assessment via a conversational chatbot. We then use AI and various algorithms to give predictive outcomes like change readiness, reskill index of that workforce on an individual and team basis. So it's aqai.io is our website. And if you just add /HHR for hacking HR, every person that's attending this, we've given a complimentary pass to get our first assessment of an AQ index score and profile across those 3 dimensions of adaptability, character, and environment, and then 15 subdimensions. So this is a very easy first step to bring awareness, understanding, and common language about how change can happen, how to remove the friction, and how to, find those with a high adaptability wake and aura, and then leverage them for those, which is the way of mentoring. What if we're using adaptability as the reverse mentoring or the cross mentoring to help change go through for the upskilling and reskilling that's necessary? So I'd be delighted. We'll also share the benchmark reports and things that we've done with lots of assessments of a range of organizations about their AQ. Thank you.
I cannot wait to take it. I'm really looking forward to it. So our time is up. So I would like to thank you, all of our panelists, for sharing all your invaluable experience and insights with us today. And I would also like to thank our attendees for being with us. And I wish to stay in touch with all of you and wishing you a great rest of your days.
Thank you, everybody.